Economists are going to fix Australia's economy. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian Heise here and welcome to another episode of Heise Says. I thought we should have a look at this article from the ABC because they asked three economists, Peter Martin, how to fix the Australian economy. And I've got my stein of coffee here, and while I take a swig, leave in the comments what you think they're all going to say, guys. Do you think it's all just going to be the same thing again and again? Yeah. Well, let's have a look. So, 13 leading economists have declared their hands in the standoff between the government and the governor of the Reserve Bank over the best way to boost the economy. All 13 back Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe. So they're all calling for more stimulus spending. Now, the problem with stimulus spending, and we'll jump over here, and this is a great website. This shows you all the different projects that are around Australia that have been proposed. Let's have a look at Tasmania. Let's see what they have there. We've got two up here. The Northern Transport Project. What is this? Other University of Tasmania. Priority project relocation of existing campuses in Launceston and Burnie to inner city locations and deliver new associate degree programs. Well, there you go. That's surprising that they want to move the universities from here all the way to Tasmania, to Launceston. Okay, let's just look at that project there. Do you think that would have a net economic benefit or not? It's whatever benefit you'll get in Launceston, I would argue you're going to have an economic decline in other locations where they're moving the campuses away. And this is just one example I picked from random. So, we have to be quite skeptical of all of these different projects and initiatives. You'll find a lot of them are roads. A lot of them are road infrastructure projects. Here we go, an M1 highway extension. And there's nothing here, I can't find any dam or water infrastructure, no innovative power generation, no special economic regions or zonal taxation, which they're looking at getting rid of, to try and stimulate or encourage investment in manufacturing. Because as I mention in every video, at least the last few, you can have a look here, just the complexity of the Australian economy. It's shattered. Guys, we are not a country or a civilization. We are a colony sending raw products back to Europe and Asia. That's all we are. We're an outpost that seems to, by chance, have a high quality of life, but with wage growth stagnating, with all of our wealth tied up in property. Is that going to last forever? So, have a look at this website here. And one of the issues is, one of the concerns is that the constant call for infrastructure spending, there is only a shortage. If you ever worked on a project of this scale, it's not like, just spending money on a house or a little project here. There's a lot of time. There's a lot of delay. If you don't spend time to plan these things properly, you get issues. You get shortcuts, you get safety problems, you get waste. So let's keep going through this article. They say that by itself, the Reserve Bank cannot be expected to do everything extra that will be needed to boost the economy. All think that extra stimulus will be needed, and all think it'll have to come from Treasurer Josh Frydenberg as well as the bank. All but two say the Treasurer should be prepared to sacrifice his goal of an immediate budget surplus in order to provide it. The 13 are members of the 20-person economic forecasting panel assembled by the conversation at the start of this year. All but one have been surprised by the extent of the economic slowdown. All but one. Okay, just look at this here. That means 12 of these experts in the economy have been surprised by the extent of the economic slowdown. What does that tell you with their capacity to predict or their understanding of the economics? Remember, we're talking about complex emergent systems here, and we have simplistic models that we use to make judgment calls on this. All the data that we're using is generally out of date. And most of what's taught in economics with regard to just the creation of money and the role of banks is completely incorrect. You just need to look at Professor Stephen Keen's videos and his modeling just to see the dramatic difference it can have. But so we keep hearing the Reserve Bank are surprised, unexpected economic headwinds. Does anyone have any confidence anymore? Guys, remember, economics, and I started studying it before I went and did architecture. I did a year of economics, and I thought it was quite funny, going from high school, how they tended to think of themselves as a science when it was a social science. And I didn't quite realize my first exposure to it was at university. I didn't do it in high school. So I thought it was quite funny. I'm going, guys, this isn't science. This isn't like chemistry or physics I did at high school. So anyway, back to this. Among them are macroeconomists, economic modelers, former Treasury, IMF, OECD, and Reserve Bank officials, and a former government minister. Well, there you go. If most of those were surprised by the slowdown in the economy, what does that tell you about just the capabilities of the people making these decisions? The Reserve Bank needs help. At issue is the government's contention, spelled out by Frydenberg's Treasury Secretary, Stephen Kennedy, in evidence to the Senate last month, that there is usually little role for government spending and tax measures in stimulating the economy in the event of a downturn. Really? I mean, this sounds like what happened in the Great Depression. What did they learn there? They cut spending. But don't worry, Stephen's helping. He's helping frame the cash transaction restrictions in such a way that anyone's concern from a libertarian or civil liberties perspective is just, marginalized. But don't worry, they've talked to the casinos and the real stakeholders. Us stupid plebs, we don't really matter. They'll just bundle us all up and ignore us. Over 3,400 of them aren't important. So that's how he's helping, and that'll generate more tax. That's what it is. That's all. My argument is that all of this, just think about it, guys. They're surprised by an extent of a slowdown. Do you think they're going to be expecting negative interest rates? No, not that. They don't think that far ahead if they're surprised by all this stuff. I lean more towards incompetence and conspiracy. That's what I would argue. It's a tax grab, in my opinion. Tax grab. But anyway, let's keep going. The bank has already cut its cash rate close to zero, 0.75%, and will consider another cut on Tuesday. I think it's 97% that the probability is 97% that there will be no cut. According to ASIC's website. It is preparing to consider so-called unconventional measures, including buying bonds, in order to force long-term interest rates down towards zero. Quantitative easing. And the thing is, the people who, the RBA will get the first benefit of it, and then inflation will trickle away at that money. Dr. Lowe has made the case for fiscal support, including through spending on infrastructure, saying there are limits to what monetary policy can achieve. Now, the problem is, it's all good for Dr. Lowe to say that, but he's a civil servant who's worked in the Reserve Bank of Australia. What type of projects will they organise? A lunch? Maybe flying around to regional parts of the country and having a speech. Organising that is not the same as a large infrastructure project. I've worked on them before. They take time. And it's something that you can't rush. You can't just turn the tap on. There's only so much capacity. It'll overheat the sector. The 13 economists unanimously backed the governor. 7 of the 13 say what is needed most is fiscal stimulus, including extra government spending on infrastructure. 3 say both fiscal and monetary measures are needed, and 3 want government structural reform, including measures to help the economy deal with climate change and remove red tape. Climate change. Yep, okay. See, this is the thing. You've got people that their modelling of the economy is inaccurate. They can't even predict the future in their own modeling. Economic models are used to measure the impact of, environmental climate change in the 100-year time frame, which is completely unpredictable. If they're surprised by what happens in a year, what do you think is going to happen in 100 years? And the environmental modeling that people use, the data is questionable at best and can be adjusted. I mean, I have absolutely no concern, no worry in the slightest over climate change. I think socialism is a much greater threat. I think a generation that is turning towards the government to take care of them and lack of individual agency, that scares me much more, because there's historical evidence where that leads to people starving and dying. You know, socialism has killed more people than climate change. Can be proven. Okay, guys? But no, we don't talk about that, do we? No. None say the Reserve Bank should be left to fight the downturn by itself without further help from the government. But the problem is, guys, Australia is a simple economy that has very little complexity, that is export dependent, and imports are going to affect our cost of living, where we've had wage stagnation, where most of our economic growth or wealth growth has been in the housing sector. And I will find my reference. I can't find it here, where property has been significantly increased by foreign investment. And this is a chart from the Foreign Investment Review Board. I know I refer to it a lot, guys have been saying in the comments, but look at how much foreign investment has come into Australia. How much that's overheated that sector. So why, when this happens, why would anyone bother investing in manufacturing when everything's cheaper from overseas, when people can make more money flipping houses than doing real work? I mean, come on. So let's have a look. There's plenty of room for fiscal stimulus, particularly infrastructure spending. Mark Crosby of Monash University. I agree with the emerging consensus that monetary policy is no longer effective when interest rates are so low. Ross Guest Griffith. It is time for coordinated monetary and fiscal policy to boost domestic demand. Guy Lim, Melbourne Institute. But the problem is, consumer confidence has been smashed, guys. Look, it's plummeting. It's plummeting. I did a video this morning, and people are saying, yeah, if I got a tax return, it went to my HEX, or it's paying off debt, or I'm paying ahead on mortgage, or credit cards go on. And they're arguing the surplus can wait. 11 of the 13 believe the government should abandon its determination to deliver a budget surplus in 2019-2020. Economic modeler Renee Fye McKibben said the government should ease its position on the surplus at all costs. Okay, I'd like to see the modelling that Renee uses. I'd like to compare it to Stephen Keen's modelling that he uses. Some of the fundamental assumptions that the problem is we've got different economic schools of thought, and they're all different theories. They simplify a really complex system. Emergence is, if you're not familiar with it, you have a series of simple elements coming together and a more complex system arising out of the interactions between those simple things. I would argue the economy is one. And it's difficult to take bits of information and predict what's happening in the complex combination when you don't have the entire picture. It's something I played with as a design tool as an architectural student back at university. It was quite interesting, but it just really makes me skeptical of the ability of these people to accurately predict what's going on when they're constantly surprised. Former Commonwealth Treasury and ANZ economist Warren Hogan says achieving a surplus in the current environment would have zero value. Well, yeah, I mean, I'd agree with him there that it is. I would love a surplus by reducing government, but that's a different thing entirely. Former OEC director Adrian Blundell-Wignall says that rather than aiming for an overall budget surplus, the government should aim instead for a net operating balance, a proposal that was put forward by Scott Morrison as Treasurer in 2017. The approach would move worthwhile infrastructure spending and borrowing onto a separate balance sheet that would not need to balance. Okay, oh wow, that doesn't sound like something that can blow up and really screw future generations. Political debate would instead focus on whether the annual operating budget was balanced or in deficit. Former Treasurer and IMF economist Tom Mankin is one of only 2 economists surveyed who back the government's continued pursuit of a surplus. saying annual interest payments on government debt have reached $14 billion, 4 times the foreign aid budget and almost twice as much as federal spending on higher education. Just think about that. I mean, is that good money or dead money? Further deterioration of the balance via farcical fiscal stimulus would risk Australia's creditworthiness. However, Professor Mankin doesn't think the government should leave everything to the Reserve Bank. He has put forward a program of extra spending on infrastructure projects that meet rigorous criteria, along with company tax cuts or investment allowances paid for by government spending cuts. Former Trade Minister Craig Emerson also wants an investment allowance, suggesting businesses should be able to immediately deduct 20% of eligible spending. Yeah, I like that idea. Definitely. It's an idea put forward by Labor during the 2019 election campaign. See, what this here is just showing you that we need to simplify our tax system. Remember, all the paperwork and the bureaucracy, it just gets in the way, and it's exhausting for businesses to deal with. And it adds complexity. And it adds cost. I would say before that, no one here is talking about simplifying the tax system. They're talking about simple things like infrastructure spending, which aren't simple, which sound simple, but are highly complex. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg has indicated something like it is being considered for the 2020 budget. Dr. Emerson says it should be possible to deliver both the investment allowance and a budget surplus. Quantitative easing would be a worry. Here we go. 5 of the 13 economists are concerned about the Reserve Bank adopting so-called unconventional measures, such as buying government and private sector bonds, in order to push long-term interest rates down towards zero, a practice known as quantitative easing. Geoffrey Sheen and Renee Fry McKimmon say it should be kept in reserve for emergencies. The United States are doing not QE as well at the moment, aren't they? And they're spending a lot of money there. Is it an emergency in the US, guys? Adrian and Mark say it hasn't worked in the countries that have tried it. Well, yeah, no, it has not. Stephen Keane says in both Europe and the United States, quantitative easing enriched banks and drove up asset prices, but did little to boost spending, because the rich don't consume much of the wealth. Come on, we're going to get a reference to Steve's approach or suggested debt jubilee. The Treasurer should step up. Taken together, the responses of the 13 economists suggest it is ultimately the government's responsibility to ensure the economy doesn't weaken any further, and that it would be especially unwise to palm it off to the Reserve Bank at a time when the bank's cash rate is close to zero and the effectiveness of the unconventional measures it might adopt is in doubt. Measures the government could adopt include increasing the rate of New Start unemployment benefits, boosting funding for schools and skills training, borrowing for well-chosen infrastructure projects, and a social rate of return greater than the cost of borrowing. With a social rate. Further tax cuts that double as tax reform, including further tax breaks for business investment, and spending more on programs that aim to avoid the worst of climate change and adapting to it. Okay. Let's have a look at these things. New Start unemployment benefits. Yeah, I mean, increasing that, most of that's going to get spent. Honestly, most of that's going to get spent. And here's the thing, if you have ever taken advantage of government manipulation into the market, artificial manipulation into the market, you have a duty of care to people who are being disadvantaged by that government manipulation into the market. And an example of that is the minimum wage. That's it. If you've ever taken advantage of that, you now have a duty of care to people who are no longer able to work to the level that isn't required by that. If you've taken advantage of any of the laws or requirements with regard to employment, you've got to cop that. Okay, so you can't just bitch and moan about the bludgers or this or that. Guys, it's not that simple. Okay? The government, by intervening, creates a dead loss in the economy. And this is one way it's represented. There's some people that, frankly probably can't find work, or maybe, are suffering from discrimination or are too old. Because as an employer, you want to avoid employing people because of the bureaucratic red tape, and sometimes it's bloody expensive employing people. Why else do you think work is being sent offshore in the professions? It's happening a lot. It really is. A lot of white-collar jobs are getting sent offshore, so you're competing on a global market, guys. I've seen it with firms we've competed with. So boosting funding for schools and skill training. Okay, that sounds good and it makes everyone feel happy, but the problem is the building education revolution had absolutely no benefit to our schooling system. There's examples of buildings getting built that have been demolished just recently. Waste of time. It led to incredible inefficiencies in the way the money was spent. Now, the skills training, what's the point in having all these people doing trade jobs and things like this when the construction sector is getting destroyed, when we're not economically competitive on a global scale, when the bureaucracy and red tape makes it a nightmare for people to start a business? It will just create a generation that's been trained up and can't find work. So, I mean, it sounds good, but there's a lot more to consider. Borrowing for well-chosen infrastructure projects with a social rate of return greater than the cost of borrowing. Okay, that sounds interesting, but that should have been done 2 years ago. And I would hope that every infrastructure project also already has a social rate of return greater than the cost of borrowing. Would that example we looked at the beginning of this video, the relocation of university campuses to central Launceston from other locations, what would be the net benefit of that? Would that be good for the economy or bad for the economy, guys? Building a road. I drove on the bypass past Toowoomba. It was empty. Cost millions. What's the benefit of it? Tax reform, yes, that we definitely need. Our tax system needs to be simplified. I know many people will argue for a transaction tax, but guys, that's a terrible idea because it can add up. It's tremendously and can have a lot of implications on the economy. We really need to simplify our tax systems. Taxes need to be reduced significantly, and people need to be given more freedom to have control over their money and more freedom to live a life how they want to. But Australia is we're a very compliant civilization in many ways. We really are. So here we go. What's the other one? Tax breaks, business investment, more programs aimed at avoiding the worst of climate change and adapting to it. Okay, just have a look at all the money that was spent on the Great Barrier Reef and all the fear associated with that. I would say we need to have probably more investment into mental health facilities, because there's a lot of people suffering from anxiety and climate change. You've got people right now that are embracing it as a religious cult, and they are willing to accept any intervention from the state to offset what they see as an existential threat to the existence of humanity. And frankly, that is terrifyingly concerning. And most of the people that have opinions on this haven't even read a scientific paper in their entire life. They probably haven't even done high school chemistry or physics. And they've got all these opinions on it and want to put their authority on you and want to increase your power costs and your cost of living and think that it will make any difference at all on a global scale when you look at all the other nations. They just don't. Their perspective is just too small. It's quite funny. It really is. Just look at the GI people. Look at all the crazy vegans that think eating meat is bad. It's sad. It really is. This pumping money into this is just going to be a waste. If you really want to, reduce Australians' carbon footprint, let's get some nuclear power in our nation and get electricity dirt cheap. Maybe some special economic regions where, we allow for the generation of nuclear energy, and then see what happens there. I know there's a lot of discussion over the submarines, why Australia, why didn't we go nuclear, this or that. We just don't have the technology or the capability here in Australia to handle it or deal with it. We need a civilian industry before we can even look at getting into the military. So economists are backing the government for its plea to help, and here are the 13 economists. There you go. Adrian, Mark, Craig, Renee, Ross, Warren, Richard, Steve, Gal, Tony, Marla, Jeffrey, and Julie. So you got quite a mix of economists there. So guys, what do you think? What do you think? Do you reckon it's going to be a solution? Do you think the government needs to do spending? Do you think it's all just a little bit too late now? There's nothing too exciting here. Nothing innovative or out of the box that jumped out here. You know, I think it's good that it's being discussed, and I think more people need to talk about these issues. I think we need to think about some unconventional, and by unconventional I mean special economic regions, looking at ways to get more money into consumers' hands, maybe finding ways to reduce bureaucracy and government red tape. You know, we need some more innovation here. Australia needs to focus on becoming a more advanced economy. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. If you like this content and would like to help me produce more, I have a Patreon and Subscribestar, and I'd like to thank everyone that supports me there. If you are an Amazon shopper, I do have a referral link, and you can use that. And it doesn't cost you anything extra, and I get a little kickback. Or otherwise, please just share the channel, and take care, everyone. Enjoy your steins of coffee.